In this video, I'm going to reveal the main manipulation strategies used against you and how to protect yourself from them for good. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and receive more content that will shield your mind. Every single day, you wake up and step into an invisible battlefield. You don't see the weapons, you don't hear the battle cries, you don't even realize you're fighting. But make no mistake, you are under siege. The enemy isn't wearing armor or carrying swords. The enemy speaks softly, smiles warmly, and often calls you friend. The enemy knows your deepest fears, your secret desires, your unspoken dreams. The enemy has studied you longer than you've studied yourself. And right now, as you read these words, the enemy is winning. What if I told you that nearly every decision you believe you made freely today was actually influenced, guided, or outright controlled by someone else? What if the thoughts you're thinking, the emotions you're feeling, and the actions you're taking aren't truly yours? You reach for your phone the moment you wake up. Why? Someone programmed that urge. You feel inadequate when you scroll through social media. Why? Someone profits from your insecurity. You buy things you don't need with money. You don't have to impress people you don't like. Why? Because someone has turned your own psychology against you. This isn't about conspiracy theories or shadowy cabals. This is about something far more pervasive and far more dangerous. The systematic exploitation of human psychology by those who understand it better than you do. Every advertisement you see, every news headline you read, every conversation you have with someone who wants something from you, these are all potential manipulation attempts, and most of the time, they work. Think about the last time you felt truly free. Not free from responsibilities or obligations, but free from the constant pressure to think, feel, and act in ways that serve someone else's agenda. Can you remember such a moment? If you're struggling to find one, you're beginning to understand the scope of the problem. You live in an age where information moves faster than wisdom, where emotion is weaponized more efficiently than logic, and where your attention is the most valuable currency on earth. Your mind has become a marketplace, and you weren't even invited to the auction. Others are bidding on your thoughts, your feelings, your choices, and you're letting them win because you don't even know the game is being played. But here's what the manipulators don't want you to know. Once you see the strings, you can't be controlled by them. Once you understand the game, you can choose not to play. Once you recognize manipulation for what it is, you become immune to its effects. The moment you stop being an unconscious participant in your own exploitation, you become something the manipulators fear most, a free-thinking, independent human being. You might be thinking this sounds paranoid or extreme. That's exactly what they're counting on. The most successful manipulation convinces you that it doesn't exist. The most effective control makes you believe you're choosing freely. The strongest chains are the ones you can't see, hear, or feel, until you try to move in a direction that serves your true interests instead of theirs. Consider this. Every single day, billions of dollars are spent studying how your mind works, how your emotions function, how your decision-making process operates. Armies of psychologists, neuroscientists, and behavioral experts are employed by corporations, political organizations, and institutions to find better ways to influence your thinking. They know which words trigger which emotions. They know which images create which desires. They know which sounds, colors, and timing combinations will make you most likely to say yes to whatever they're selling. And what do you know about how your own mind works? When was the last time you studied your own psychology with the same intensity that others are studying it? When did you last examine your emotional triggers, your cognitive biases, your unconscious patterns? If you can't answer these questions, you're bringing a stick to a nuclear war. The manipulation isn't always malicious. Sometimes it comes from people who genuinely believe they know what's best for you. Your parents, your friends, your colleagues, your romantic partners, they all have ideas about how you should live, what you should want, who you should become. Some of their intentions are pure, but intentions don't matter when the result is the same. You living a life that isn't truly yours. You've been taught to be polite, to avoid conflict, to consider others' feelings before your own. These aren't inherently bad qualities, but they become weapons in the hands of those who would exploit your good nature. Your desire to be liked, to be accepted, to be seen as reasonable and kind. These are the very qualities that make you vulnerable to influence. Watch how quickly you change your opinion when someone you respect disagrees with you. Notice how easily you modify your behavior when faced with social pressure. Observe how often you do things you don't want to do simply because saying no feels uncomfortable. These aren't character flaws, they're human nature. But human nature, left unexamined and unguarded, becomes a highway for manipulation. The most insidious part is how normal it all feels. You don't wake up feeling manipulated because the manipulation has become the background noise of your existence. It's like living next to a highway. Eventually you stop hearing the traffic. But just because you've adapted to the noise doesn't mean it's not affecting you. Your sleep patterns are influenced by artificial light designed to keep you awake and consuming. Your food choices are shaped by engineered flavors that hijack your brain's reward systems. Your relationship expectations are molded by entertainment that profits from your dissatisfaction with reality. Your financial decisions are guided by marketing that exploits your deepest fears and desires. Your political opinions are formed by algorithms that show you exactly what they know will provoke the strongest emotional response. Even your sense of self-worth is being manipulated. You're constantly measuring yourself against images that have been edited, stories that have been crafted, and standards that have been artificially created to keep you feeling inadequate. The goal isn't to make you happy, it's to keep you wanting. Happy people don't consume as much. Content people don't click as often. Satisfied people don't buy as frequently. But what if you could step outside this system? What if you could develop the ability to think your own thoughts, feel your own feelings, and make your own choices, regardless of what others want from you? What if you could become so internally anchored that external pressure couldn't move you unless you decided to let it? This isn't about becoming paranoid or distrustful. It's about becoming discerning. It's about developing the psychological sophistication to recognize when someone is trying to influence you and having the strength to choose your response consciously rather than reactively. The first step is accepting that you've been manipulated. Not might have been daily, consistently, by experts who are very good at what they do. This isn't a personal failing on your part. It's the natural result of living in a world where influence has become a science and your psychology is the laboratory. The second step is understanding that this manipulation isn't inevitable. You can develop immunity, you can build resistance, you can learn to see the strings before they're attached, recognize the hooks before they're set, identify the traps before you step into them. But it requires more than just awareness. It requires a fundamental shift in how you relate to your own mind, your own emotions, and your own decision-making process. It requires you to become the guardian of your own consciousness instead of its passive inhabitant. You have to become willing to be uncomfortable. Manipulation often works by offering you comfort in exchange for control. The easy path, the pleasant feeling, the socially acceptable choice, these are often the very routes that lead you away from your authentic self and towards someone else's agenda. You have to become willing to be different. The pressure to conform is one of the strongest forces in human psychology, and manipulators know exactly how to leverage it. Standing apart from the crowd, thinking independently, choosing your own path, these acts require courage that most people aren't willing to develop. You have to become willing to be alone. Not lonely, alone. Able to sit with your own thoughts without distraction, comfortable with your own company without external validation, confident in your own judgment without constant reassurance from others. Most importantly, you have to become willing to take full responsibility for your own mind. No more blaming your reactions on others' actions. No more letting your emotions be dictated by external circumstances. No more allowing your thoughts to be shaped by whatever influence happens to be strongest in the moment. This is the beginning of true freedom, not the illusion of choice within predetermined options, but the real capacity to think, feel, and act from your own center regardless of what anyone else wants from you. The manipulators are counting on you to remain unconscious. They're betting that you'll stay reactive, predictable, and controllable. They're wagering that you'll continue to mistake their programming for your preferences, their goals for your desires, their fears for your limitations. What if you proved them wrong? What if you became the kind of person who couldn't be manipulated because you were too awake, too aware, too internally anchored to be moved by external pressure? What if you developed such clarity about your own values, your own purposes, your own authentic desires that no amount of psychological pressure could knock you off course? Imagine a world where you made decisions based on your own deep wisdom rather than others' cleverly crafted suggestions. Imagine relationships where you responded from love rather than reacted from fear. Imagine a life where your choices emerged from your own authentic desires rather than from carefully engineered impulses. That world is possible. That life is available. That person, the one who cannot be manipulated, is who you can become. But only if you're willing to wake up to what's really happening around you and within you every single day. Look around you. Really look. What do you see? You see people staring at screens, their faces illuminated by artificial light, their minds absorbing whatever someone else decided they should think about today. You see individuals making the same decisions, buying the same products, expressing the same opinions, all while believing they're thinking for themselves. You see human beings living like livestock, fed what someone else wants them to eat, entertained by what someone else wants them to watch, angry about what someone else wants them to hate. They're sleepwalking through their own lives, and the worst part is they think they're wide awake. This is what happens when people ignore the reality of manipulation. This is the price of psychological unconsciousness. This is the cost of letting others think for you while believing you're thinking for yourself. The majority of people today have become remarkably predictable. Show them a certain image and they'll feel a specific emotion. Use particular words and they'll have predetermined reactions. Present them with calculated choices and they'll select exactly what you want them to select, while feeling like they're exercising free will. They've been trained like laboratory rats and they don't even know they're in a maze. Watch them at the grocery store reaching for products placed at eye level by psychologists who studied their shopping patterns. See them in restaurants, ordering dishes described with carefully chosen adjectives designed to trigger appetite responses. Observe them on social media, engaging with content optimized by algorithms that know their psychological profile better than they know themselves. They think they're living. They're actually being lived. The tragedy isn't that manipulation exists. It's that people have become so comfortable with being manipulated that they resist any suggestion that it's happening. They've made peace with their own exploitation. They've become collaborators in their own psychological enslavement. "I'm not being manipulated," they'll insist, even as they explain why they suddenly need a product they'd never heard of until last week. "I make my own decisions," they'll claim, even as they repeat opinions they absorb from sources that profit from their agreement. "I think for myself," they'll declare, even as they demonstrate thinking patterns that match perfectly with someone else's desired outcomes. The manipulation has become so seamless, so sophisticated, so woven into the fabric of daily life that questioning it feels like questioning reality itself. And perhaps that's the point. Consider Michael, a composite of countless real people whose stories illustrate what happens when manipulation goes unrecognized and unchallenged. Michael thought he was living his own life. He prided himself on being independent, strong-willed, nobody's fool. He made his own decisions, chose his own path, lived according to his own values. At least that's what he believed. Michael started each day by checking his phone. The news app he'd downloaded showed him carefully curated stories designed to trigger emotional responses that would keep him engaged. The anger he felt at the morning headlines wasn't his authentic emotional response to genuine injustice. It was manufactured outrage optimized for clicks and advertising revenue. His breakfast choices were shaped by marketing campaigns that had convinced him certain foods were healthy when they were actually profitable. His commute was filled with podcasts and radio shows that gradually shaped his worldview in directions that served various political and commercial interests. His work decisions were influenced by company cultures designed to extract maximum productivity while making him feel fulfilled and valued. Even his relationships were affected. The dating apps he used employed psychological principles to keep him swiping, searching, never quite satisfied with what he had. The relationship advice he consumed was designed to create dependency on the source, rather than genuine emotional growth. His social interactions were increasingly mediated by platforms that profited from conflict and division. Michael's entertainment choices were guided by recommendation algorithms that knew exactly how to keep him watching. His purchasing decisions were the result of sophisticated psychological profiling that could predict what he'd want before he wanted it. His political opinions aligned suspiciously well with the targeted messaging he'd been receiving for months, but Michael felt free. He felt like he was choosing. Every decision seemed to emerge from his own preferences, his own values, his own authentic desires. The manipulation was so complete that it had become invisible. The first crack in Michael's psychological armor came when he noticed he was consistently stressed, anxious, and dissatisfied, despite having everything he thought he wanted. He had the job the career advice said would make him happy, the lifestyle the influencers said would fulfill him, the goals the success gurus said would complete him. Yet, something was wrong. He began to notice that his thoughts during quiet moments didn't match the thoughts he had when consuming media. His natural emotional responses were different from the feelings he had when engaging with designed experiences. His authentic desires seemed to exist in a different realm entirely from the wants that dominated his daily decision-making. But instead of investigating these discrepancies, Michael did what most people do. He consumed more entertainment to drown out the uncomfortable questions, more products to fill the inexplicable emptiness, more expert opinions to replace the doubts with certainty, more social validation to substitute for the missing sense of authentic connection to his own life. The manipulation tightened around him like a slowly constricting serpent, and he called it comfort. Michael's career stagnated because he'd been taught to wait for permission instead of creating his own opportunities. His relationships remained shallow because he'd been conditioned to seek validation rather than genuine connection. His financial situation deteriorated because he'd been programmed to consume rather than create value. His health declined because he'd been sold convenience over vitality, pleasure over well-being. Most tragically, Michael's sense of self began to fragment. He no longer knew which thoughts were his and which had been implanted. He couldn't distinguish between his authentic emotions and his conditioned responses. He'd lost touch with his own values, his own purposes, his own deepest desires. Michael had become a stranger to himself, and he didn't even realize it. The breaking point came when Michael found himself arguing passionately for a position he didn't actually believe in, using talking points he'd absorbed from sources he couldn't remember, defending ideas that served interests he didn't share. In that moment, he caught a glimpse of what he'd become, a spokesperson for someone else's agenda, a puppet who'd forgotten he was dancing to someone else's tune. But even then, even faced with clear evidence of his own psychological manipulation, Michael chose to look away. The comfort of unconsciousness felt safer than the responsibility of awareness. The predictability of being controlled felt easier than the uncertainty of being free. Michael represents millions of people who sense something is wrong but lack the courage to examine what it might be. They feel the strings but pretend they're not being pulled. They notice the patterns but refuse to see the design. They experience the consequences but won't acknowledge the cause. This is what happens when people ignore the reality of manipulation. They become willing participants in their own diminishment. They trade their psychological sovereignty for the illusion of security. They surrender their mental independence for the comfort of being told what to think, feel, and want. They become human beings in form, but psychological livestock in function. You see them everywhere now. People who've outsourced their thinking to experts, their feeling to entertainment, their wanting to marketers. They've become echo chambers for other people's thoughts, transmission devices for other people's emotions, purchasing agents for other people's profits. They speak in borrowed phrases about borrowed ideas in service of borrowed goals. They feel manufactured emotions about manipulated situations toward designed outcomes. They want products they didn't know existed, for needs they didn't know they had to solve problems that were created by the very system that's now selling them solutions. And when you try to point this out, they resist, not because they don't see it, but because seeing it would require them to take responsibility for what they've allowed to happen to their own minds. it would demand that they reclaim authority over their own consciousness. It would mean admitting that the life they think they've chosen might actually be the life that was chosen for them. The resistance isn't logical, it's psychological. They've become invested in their own manipulation because acknowledging it would require change, and change requires effort, and effort requires courage. And courage is the one thing the manipulation has been systematically designed to erode. They've been taught to be comfortable with confusion, to accept contradictions, to embrace complexity as an excuse for inaction. They've been conditioned to seek experts instead of developing wisdom, to find gurus instead of trusting themselves, to look for leaders instead of becoming sovereign. The manipulation succeeds not through force, but through the systematic destruction of individual discernment. People lose the ability to distinguish between authentic and artificial, between organic and manufactured, between chosen and conditioned. They become psychologically colorblind in a world painted with increasingly sophisticated illusions. You can see it in their conversations, recycled opinions presented as personal insights. You can hear it in their emotions, triggered responses mistaken for authentic feelings. You can observe it in their choices, programmed behaviors disguised as free will decisions. They've become what the manipulators needed them to become: predictable, controllable, profitable resources, rather than unpredictable, sovereign, authentic human beings. The saddest part isn't that they're being manipulated, it's that they've learned to love their manipulation. They defend the systems that exploit them. They attack those who point out their conditioning. They've become guards in their own psychological prison. This is the natural result of ignoring manipulation. You don't just become its victim, you become its advocate. You don't just suffer from it, you spread it. You don't just accept it, you protect it. But you are not Michael. You are not the sleepwalking masses. You are not destined to become a transmission device for someone else's agenda, a purchasing agent for someone else's profits, an echo chamber for someone else's thoughts. You have a choice that Michael refused to make, that the masses are afraid to make, that the manipulators desperately hope you won't make. You can wake up. You can reclaim your mind. You can develop discernment. You can learn to think your own thoughts, feel your own feelings, make your own choices. You can become psychologically sovereign in a world designed to keep you dependent. But only if you're willing to see what others refuse to look at, acknowledge what others deny, and take responsibility for what others blame on external circumstances. The question isn't whether you're being manipulated, you are. The question is whether you're going to continue letting it happen unconsciously or start choosing your response consciously. What if you decided to make different choices than the ones Michael made? What if you chose awareness over comfort, responsibility over victimhood, sovereignty over dependence? What if you decided to become the kind of person who couldn't be manipulated because you were too awake, too aware, too centered in your own authentic truth to be moved by external pressure? The great minds of human psychological development have been trying to tell you something for centuries, but their message has been diluted, commercialized, and weaponized by the very forces they warned against. Carl Jung spoke of individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are rather than who others want you to be. But his insights have been packaged into self-help formulas that serve the agenda of keeping you seeking rather than finding. Epictetus taught that you cannot control what happens to you, only your response to what happens. But his wisdom has been twisted into platitudes that actually make you more controllable, not less. Viktor Frankl discovered that the one freedom that cannot be taken from you is your freedom to choose your attitude toward any circumstance. But even this profound truth has been commercialized into positive thinking programs that actually weaken your psychological resistance to manipulation. Napoleon Hill investigated the thinking patterns of successful people, only to have his findings used to create more sophisticated methods of influence and control. The irony is devastating. The very wisdom that could set you free has been turned into tools for your enslavement. Here's what these giants of human understanding actually discovered, stripped of the commercial packaging and cultural distortion. True psychological freedom requires a level of self-awareness and internal development that most people are unwilling to pursue because it demands radical responsibility and uncomfortable truth. They understood something that modern culture desperately wants you to forget. You are not your thoughts. You are not your emotions. You are not your impulses, and you are certainly not your reactions. You are the consciousness that can observe these phenomena, evaluate them, and choose your response to them. But this understanding creates a problem for those who profit from your unconsciousness. A person who can observe their own thoughts cannot be controlled through thought manipulation. A person who can regulate their own emotions cannot be controlled through emotional manipulation. A person who can choose their responses cannot be controlled through stimulus-response conditioning. This is why the deepest psychological truths are either hidden, distorted, or packaged in ways that actually prevent their application. Nietzsche warned of the herd mentality, the human tendency to think and feel as the group thinks and feels, rather than developing individual perspective. But his warning has been turned into rebellious posturing that actually serves the system by creating predictable counter-reactions rather than genuine independence. James Clear documented the power of habits in shaping human behavior, but his insights have been used by marketers to create more addictive products and by institutions to establish more controlling systems rather than helping individuals develop beneficial personal patterns. The pattern is clear. Every breakthrough in understanding human psychology becomes a weapon for psychological control unless you understand it deeply enough to apply it for your own liberation. Here's the fundamental logic that underlies all psychological manipulation. If you react automatically to stimuli, you can be controlled by anyone who can control the stimuli. If your emotions can be triggered predictably, you can be managed by anyone who can trigger them. If your thoughts follow programmed patterns, you can be directed by anyone who understands the programming. Manipulation succeeds because it bypasses your conscious decision-making process and activates your automatic response systems. It works in the gap between stimulus and response, the space where your unconscious programming operates faster than your conscious awareness. Think of your mind as a fortress. Manipulation is siege warfare. The attackers don't try to break down the main gates where your conscious defenses are strong. Instead, they find the hidden passages, the unguarded entrances, the structural weaknesses you don't even know exist. They target your cognitive biases, the mental shortcuts your brain uses to process information quickly. They exploit your emotional triggers, the unresolved fears and desires that create automatic reactions. They leverage your social programming, the deep need for belonging and acceptance that makes you vulnerable to group pressure. But here's what they don't want you to understand. These same vulnerabilities, when recognized and understood, become sources of strength. Your biases, when acknowledged, become tools for clearer thinking. Your emotional triggers, when mapped, become early warning systems for manipulation attempts. Your social needs, when consciously directed, become foundations for authentic connection, rather than sources of exploitation. The fortress of your mind becomes impregnable, not by eliminating its vulnerabilities, but by transforming them into advantages through conscious awareness and deliberate development. Consider the metaphor of the river and the dam. Your thoughts and emotions are like water. They flow naturally according to the landscape they encounter. Manipulation is like redirecting the river with artificial channels, dams, and barriers. The water still flows, but it flows where someone else wants it to go rather than following its natural course. Psychological freedom is like removing the artificial constructions and allowing the water to carve its own path through the landscape. Your thoughts and emotions still flow, but they flow according to your authentic nature rather than someone else's design. The sculptor sees the statue already existing within the marble. They simply remove what doesn't belong. Similarly, your authentic self already exists within your conditioned personality. Psychological development isn't about adding something new. It's about removing what was artificially imposed. But here's where most people misunderstand the process. You can't remove conditioning without first becoming conscious of it. You can't stop reacting automatically without first recognizing that you're reacting automatically. You can't choose your responses without first observing the gap between stimulus and response. This is why awareness itself is threatening to manipulators. Not the illusion of awareness, the self-congratulating belief that you're already conscious, but genuine awareness that allows you to see your own mental and emotional patterns operating in real time. The ancient Stoics understood this principle perfectly. They developed exercises specifically designed to create space between events and reactions. When Epictetus taught his students to pause before responding to any situation, he wasn't teaching passivity, he was teaching sovereignty. The pause is where your freedom lives. In that pause, you can ask, is this thought mine or was it planted? Is this emotion authentic or triggered? Is this desire genuine or manufactured? Is this choice emerging from my values or from someone else's agenda? Most people never ask these questions because they've been taught that spontaneous reaction is authentic, that immediate response is genuine, that unexamined impulse is honest. This is exactly backward. Spontaneous reaction is usually programmed response. Immediate emotional eruption is often triggered conditioning. Unexamined impulse is frequently implanted suggestion. True authenticity requires the cultivation of conscious awareness. Real genuineness demands the development of discernment. Actual honesty involves the courage to examine your own mental and emotional processes without flinching from what you discover. Jung called this process making the unconscious conscious. It's the work of bringing your automatic patterns into the light of awareness, where they can be evaluated, modified, or eliminated. It's the difference between being lived by your conditioning and living consciously despite your conditioning. But this work is not comfortable. It requires you to question thoughts you've believed without examination, feelings you've trusted without investigation, and impulses you've followed without consideration. It demands that you become a detective, investigating your own mind, a scientist studying your own behavior, a judge evaluating your own motivations. Most people avoid this work because it reveals uncomfortable truths. You discover that many of your strongest opinions aren't actually yours. You realize that many of your deepest feelings have been artificially generated. You recognize that many of your most important decisions have been influenced by factors you never considered. This recognition can be devastating to your ego, but it's liberating for your authentic self. The ego wants to maintain the illusion that you're already free, already authentic, already conscious. The authentic self wants to become actually free, actually authentic, actually conscious, regardless of what that requires. The path from manipulation to liberation follows a predictable pattern mapped by every tradition that has seriously studied human psychological development. First comes recognition, seeing manipulation for what it is, rather than mistaking it for normal social interaction. You begin to notice the techniques, the patterns, the systematic nature of influence attempts. Second comes understanding, grasping how manipulation works, why it succeeds, what makes you vulnerable, and how your own psychology has been turned against you. Third comes resistance, developing the ability to recognize manipulation attempts in real time and choosing your response rather than reacting automatically. Fourth comes immunity, reaching a level of psychological development where manipulation attempts simply bounce off you because you're too centered in your own authentic truth to be moved by external pressure. Finally comes mastery, understanding influence so deeply that you can use it consciously and ethically to serve your authentic purposes, rather than being used by it unconsciously to serve others' agendas. This progression isn't automatic. Each stage requires specific skills, deliberate practice, and sustained effort, but the rewards aren't just personal, they're social and even civilizational. Every person who becomes psychologically sovereign makes manipulation a little less effective for everyone. The manipulators understand this, which is why they work so hard to keep people stuck in the early stages of recognition and understanding without progressing to resistance and immunity. They flood the world with information about manipulation techniques while providing no practical training in developing psychological defenses. They want you to know you're being manipulated but feel powerless to stop it. Knowledge without application becomes despair. Awareness without skill becomes anxiety. Understanding without development becomes victimhood. But you are not destined to remain a victim of your own knowledge. You can develop the psychological sophistication necessary to transform recognition into resistance, understanding into immunity, awareness into mastery. The ancient Chinese strategist Sun Tzu taught that if you know yourself and know your enemy, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. Your enemy is not other people. Your enemy is unconsciousness. Your enemy is automatic reaction. Your enemy is unexamined conditioning. To know your enemy, study manipulation, understand its methods, recognize its patterns. But more importantly, know yourself. Develop awareness of your thoughts, emotions, and responses. Map your triggers, understand your biases, examine your programming. The fortress of psychological freedom isn't built overnight, but every act of conscious awareness adds another stone to the foundation. Every pause between stimulus and response strengthens the walls. Every choice made from authentic values, rather than external pressure, reinforces the defenses. You are building something that no external force can destroy. A mind that thinks its own thoughts, a heart that feels its own feelings, a will that chooses its own directions. This is what the great thinkers were pointing toward when they spoke of individuation, sovereignty, and authentic existence. This is what they meant when they talked about becoming fully human, rather than remaining a sophisticated animal responding to stimuli. You have the capacity to build this fortress. You have the materials in your own consciousness. You have the blueprints in the wisdom traditions of human development. The only question is whether you're willing to begin construction. Stop thinking about psychological freedom as a distant goal you'll achieve someday, and start treating it as a skill you can practice today. Right now, in the next conversation you have, in the next decision you make, in the next moment, someone tries to influence your thinking. Freedom isn't a destination, it's a practice. Sovereignty isn't a state you reach, it's a choice you make repeatedly, moment by moment, interaction by interaction. And like any skill worth developing, it requires specific daily practices that build your psychological muscle memory until conscious awareness becomes your default mode rather than your occasional visitor. Here are the 5 daily practices that transform ordinary people into psychologically sovereign individuals. Master these, and manipulation becomes powerless against you. Ignore them, and even the greatest theoretical understanding won't protect you when pressure is applied. Practice 1. The strategic pause. Interrupt your automatic response patterns by creating space between stimulus and reaction. Every time someone makes a request, presents an argument, or triggers an emotional response, pause. Count to 3 before speaking. Take a breath before deciding. Create a micro moment of conscious awareness before allowing yourself to respond. This sounds simple, but it's revolutionary in practice. Most manipulation succeeds because it bypasses your conscious decision-making process and triggers automatic responses. The pause is your emergency brake system for unconscious reactivity. When your boss asks you to take on additional work without additional compensation, pause. Don't immediately say yes out of fear or no out of resentment. Use those 3 seconds to check in with yourself. What do I actually think about this request? What are my real options here? How does this align with my values and priorities? When someone uses emotional language designed to make you feel guilty, pause. Don't defend yourself automatically or accept their framework immediately. Ask yourself, is this guilt appropriate or manufactured? What would I think about this situation if I weren't feeling emotionally triggered? When you see news that makes you angry, pause. Don't share it immediately or let it dictate your mood for the day. Question: who benefits from my anger about this? What am I not seeing while I'm focused on this emotional trigger? Is this the most important thing I could be thinking about right now? Practice the pause everywhere. In traffic when someone cuts you off, in stores when salespeople use pressure tactics, in social situations when people express opinions designed to get specific reactions from you, in relationships when your partner pushes emotional buttons you didn't even know you had. The pause isn't about becoming slow or indecisive, it's about becoming conscious. 3 seconds of awareness can save you from years of consequences that emerged from unconscious reactions. Practice. 2. Question the source. Develop the habit of immediately asking, Who benefits from my believing this? Every time you encounter information, opinions, or emotional triggers, this isn't paranoia, it's psychological hygiene. In a world where your attention is the most valuable currency, someone is always trying to profit from your thoughts and feelings. When you feel suddenly worried about your health after seeing an advertisement, ask, who profits from my worry? When you find yourself wanting a product you'd never considered before, ask, who benefits from this desire? When you feel outraged about a news story, ask, who gains from my anger? This practice extends beyond obvious commercial and political manipulation. When a friend constantly complains about their problems but resists solutions, ask, what is this person getting from keeping me focused on their drama? When a family member tries to make you feel guilty for your choices, ask, how does my guilt serve their agenda? Practice this with your own thoughts too. When you find yourself thinking you're not successful enough, attractive enough, or accomplished enough, ask, who benefits from my insecurity? What industries profit from my dissatisfaction with myself? The goal isn't to become cynical, but to become discerning. Most people accept information and influence without examining the source or motivation behind it. You're going to become the kind of person who automatically considers the agenda behind every influence attempt. Start small. Question the source of one thing every day for a week. Notice how much influence you're exposed to that you'd never examined before. Observe how differently you respond to information when you consider who wants you to believe it and why. Practice 3. The emotional audit. Check in with your emotional state every 4 hours and ask, are these feelings mine, or were they triggered by external input? Most people live in a constant state of emotional reactivity without ever examining what generated their feelings or whether those feelings serve their authentic interests. Your emotions are not sacred just because you're feeling them. They can be artificially generated, externally triggered, and strategically manipulated. Developing the ability to distinguish between authentic emotional responses and manufactured feelings is crucial for psychological sovereignty. When you feel anxious, trace the feeling back to its source. Did it emerge from genuine concerns about real situations you can influence, or was it triggered by media designed to create anxiety? When you feel inadequate, examine what generated that feeling. Did it come from honest self-reflection, or from exposure to images and messages designed to make you feel insufficient? When you feel angry, investigate the anger. Is it appropriate to the situation and proportional to what actually happened, or is it the result of inflammatory language designed to provoke that exact response? When you feel desire for something new, ask whether that desire emerged from authentic need or was manufactured by marketing. Set 4 alarms on your phone. When they go off, pause whatever you're doing and honestly assess your emotional state. Name what you're feeling, identify what triggered it, and evaluate whether that emotion serves your authentic well-being or someone else's agenda. This practice is initially uncomfortable because you discover how much of your emotional life has been externally generated. But this discomfort leads to emotional sovereignty, the ability to feel your own feelings rather than being a transmission device for others' emotional manipulations. Practice 4. The value filter. Before making any decision, large or small, ask yourself, does this choice align with my deepest values, or is it serving someone else's interests? Most people have never clearly identified their core values, which makes them easy targets for anyone who wants to impose external values through manipulation. Your values are not your preferences, your opinions, or your desires. Values are the fundamental principles that define who you are at your core. They're the non-negotiable standards that guide your decisions when pressure is applied. If you don't know what you stand for, you'll fall for anything. Identify 3 to 5 core values that define your authentic self. Not values you think you should have, or values that sound impressive, but values that emerge from your deepest truth. Maybe you value integrity above popularity, creativity above security, courage above comfort, or authentic connection above social approval. Use these values as a filter for every decision. When someone pressures you to do something that violates your integrity, the answer is automatic: no. When opportunities arise that compromise your core values for short-term gain, you don't even need to think about it. you decline. Practice this with small decisions first. When choosing what to eat, ask whether your choice aligns with your value of taking care of your body or serves the food industry's interest in addictive consumption. When deciding how to spend your evening, ask whether your choice reflects your value of personal growth or someone else's interest in keeping you distracted. Extend this to larger decisions. When considering job opportunities, relationships, living situations, or major purchases, run them through your value filter. Does this choice make you more yourself or less yourself? Does it strengthen your character or compromise it? Does it serve your authentic purposes or someone else's agenda? People who are clear about their values are extremely difficult to manipulate because they have internal reference points that external pressure cannot move. They know who they are independently of what others want them to be. Practice 5. The Influence Inventory. At the end of each day, spend 5 minutes cataloging every attempt that was made to influence your thinking, feeling, or behavior. This practice develops your recognition skills until you can spot manipulation attempts in real time, rather than realizing afterward that you were targeted. Most people are exposed to hundreds of influence attempts daily, but notice almost none of them. Advertisements, news headlines, social media posts, conversations with agenda-driven individuals, workplace pressure, social expectations, the list is endless. Your goal is to become conscious of influence rather than unconsciously absorbing it. Keep a simple log. Write down what the influence attempt was, who was behind it, what technique was used, and how you responded. Did the grocery store's product placement influence your purchases? Did a news headline affect your mood without you examining the story carefully? Did a friend's opinion about your choices make you doubt yourself? Include subtle influences too. Did someone's tone of voice make you feel defensive? Did a social media post make you compare yourself to others? Did an advertisement make you feel like you were missing out on something? The inventory isn't about judging yourself for being influenced. It's about developing awareness so you can choose your responses consciously. You'll be shocked at how much influence you've been unconsciously absorbing. After a week of keeping this log, you'll notice patterns. Certain types of influence work on you more than others. Specific people in your life regularly attempt to shape your thinking. Particular emotional states make you more vulnerable to manipulation. This awareness allows you to develop specific defenses. If you notice that you're most vulnerable to social pressure when you're tired, you can avoid making social commitments when you're exhausted. If you realize that certain people always leave you feeling confused about your own judgment, you can limit your exposure to them or prepare strategies for maintaining clarity during interactions. Integrating the practices. These 5 practices work together to create a comprehensive system of psychological self-defense. The pause creates space for conscious awareness. Questioning the source develops discernment about influence attempts. The emotional audit builds emotional sovereignty. The value filter provides clear decision-making criteria. The influence inventory develops recognition skills. Start with one practice for 1 week. Master it completely before adding the next one. Building psychological sovereignty requires depth, not breadth. One practice done consistently is more valuable than 5 practices done sporadically. Expect resistance, both internal and external. Your unconscious mind will resist these practices because they require more effort than automatic reactivity. Other people will resist your growing sovereignty because it makes you less controllable and less predictable. Your spouse might complain that you're overthinking everything when you start pausing before reacting. Your friends might say you're becoming paranoid when you question sources they've never examined. Your colleagues might accuse you of being difficult when you stop automatically agreeing to requests that don't align with your values. This resistance is evidence that the practices are working. People who profit from your unconsciousness will always resist your awakening. Systems that depend on your reactivity will always pressure you to remain reactive. But with each day of practice, you'll notice something remarkable happening. Decisions become easier because you're choosing from clear values rather than reacting to pressure. Relationships become more authentic because you're responding from your true self rather than from conditioning. Stress decreases because you're no longer being pushed around by every influence attempt that comes your way. you'll discover that psychological sovereignty isn't about becoming isolated or defensive. It's about becoming genuinely free to engage with life from your own center, rather than being lived by forces you never examined. These practices are not suggestions. They are requirements for anyone who wants to live as a free human being rather than as a sophisticated puppet. Master them, and you join the ranks of the psychologically sovereign. Ignore them, and remain at the mercy of anyone skilled in the arts of influence and control. There are forces in this world that cannot be moved, influenced, or controlled. They stand as eternal symbols of what you can become when you align yourself with truth rather than convenience, with principle rather than pressure, with your authentic nature rather than external expectations. Consider the ancient lighthouse standing alone on a rocky cliff, battered by storms that have raged for centuries. The winds howl around it, the waves crash against its foundation, the rain lashes its walls, yet it remains unmoved, steady, constant. Its light shines not because the conditions are favorable, but because its purpose transcends the temporary turbulence around it. You can become this lighthouse. The storms around you are the constant attempts to manipulate your thinking, your feeling, your choosing. The winds are the voices telling you who to be, what to want, how to live. The waves are the emotional pressures designed to knock you off balance. The rain is the relentless flood of information meant to overwhelm your capacity for clear judgment. But like the lighthouse, you have a foundation that goes deeper than the surface turbulence. You have a structure built for endurance rather than comfort. You have a light that shines from internal power rather than external approval. The lighthouse doesn't fight the storm. It simply remains itself regardless of what rages around it. It doesn't argue with the wind or negotiate with the waves. It doesn't change its essential nature to accommodate the weather. It stands firm in its identity and purpose, while everything around it shifts and changes. This is the first quality of psychological sovereignty: unwavering consistency with your authentic self, regardless of external pressure. You become someone who cannot be moved from your center because you've discovered what your center actually is and committed to remaining there no matter what. But the lighthouse metaphor goes deeper. Notice that the lighthouse's primary function isn't to protect itself. It's to guide others through treacherous waters. Its strength serves a purpose beyond its own survival. Similarly, your psychological sovereignty isn't just for your benefit. When you become unmovable in your authenticity, you become a reference point for others who are still being tossed around by the storms of manipulation and influence. People sense when they're in the presence of someone who cannot be manipulated. They feel the stability, the groundedness, the unshakable quality of character that comes from deep self-knowledge and unwavering commitment to truth. Some are threatened by this stability because it highlights their own psychological volatility. Others are drawn to it because it represents the very thing they're unconsciously seeking, a model of what it means to be genuinely free. Your psychological sovereignty becomes a beacon that guides others toward their own freedom. Not through preaching or teaching, but through embodiment. You show what's possible simply by being it. But lighthouses are not born. They are built, stone by stone, with careful attention to foundation, structure, and purpose. This brings us to the second metaphor, the master sculptor working with a block of marble. Imagine Michelangelo standing before a massive piece of raw stone, seeing something within it that no one else can perceive. The David already exists within the marble. The sculptor's job is not to create something from nothing, but to remove everything that is not David. Every chip of the chisel, every careful strike of the hammer, every patient hour of work is dedicated to revealing what was always there beneath the surface. You are both the sculptor and the marble. Your authentic self, your true character, your genuine values, your real purposes, already exists within you, but it's been covered by layers of conditioning, expectation, and manipulation. The work of becoming psychologically sovereign is the work of carefully removing everything that is not authentically you. Each time you pause instead of reacting automatically, you're chipping away marble that doesn't belong. Each time you question the source of an influence attempt, you're removing another layer of artificial overlay. Each time you choose your response based on your values rather than external pressure, you're revealing more of your true form. This work requires the patience of a master craftsman. Michelangelo didn't create David in a day, and you won't achieve psychological sovereignty overnight. But every conscious choice, every moment of awareness, every act of resistance to manipulation removes more of what doesn't belong and reveals more of who you actually are. The sculptor knows that some strikes of the chisel will remove large chunks of unwanted material, while others will make almost imperceptible refinements. Similarly, some moments of awakening will create dramatic shifts in your consciousness, while others will produce subtle but essential adjustments to your psychological posture. Both are necessary, both are valuable. Both contribute to the emergence of your authentic self from beneath the accumulated layers of conditioning and control. The sculptor also knows that the most delicate work, the final details that bring the statue to life, can only be done when the rough shaping is complete. Your psychological sovereignty develops the same way. First, you remove the obvious manipulations, the blatant influence attempts, the clear violations of your boundaries. Then you refine your awareness to detect more subtle forms of control, more sophisticated techniques of influence, more nuanced ways that your authenticity is being compromised. This progression requires tremendous patience with yourself and the process. You're undoing years or decades of conditioning while simultaneously building new patterns of conscious awareness. You're learning to see influences you've never noticed while developing skills you've never practiced. You're becoming someone you've never been while discovering who you've always been beneath the artificial layers. But there's something the sculptor knows that the casual observer doesn't. The finished work was always inevitable, once the vision was clear and the commitment was made. Every strike of the chisel, every hour of patient work, every moment of focused attention was moving toward the predetermined outcome. The David was always going to emerge because the sculptor could see it from the beginning and was willing to do whatever work was necessary to reveal it. Your psychological sovereignty is equally inevitable once you've seen it clearly and committed to the work of revelation. You will become the person who cannot be manipulated because you've seen that person within yourself, and you're willing to remove everything that stands in the way of their emergence. This brings us to the third metaphor, the ancient tree that has weathered countless seasons, grown through all kinds of conditions, and developed a root system so deep and extensive that it cannot be shaken by any surface disturbance. This tree didn't grow in perfect conditions. It faced droughts that tested its resilience, storms that challenged its flexibility, and seasons of dormancy that required patience and faith. Each challenge caused it to send its roots deeper, spread them wider, and develop greater stability. You are growing the same kind of root system in your consciousness. Every manipulation attempt you resist sends your psychological roots deeper into your authentic values. Every influence technique you recognize spreads your awareness wider into previously unconscious areas of your mind. Every choice you make from conscious awareness rather than automatic reaction strengthens the foundation that keeps you stable regardless of what's happening around you. The tree doesn't resist the seasons. It flows with them while remaining rooted in its essential nature. Winter doesn't make it stop being a tree. It simply reveals the underlying structure that was there all along. Summer doesn't change its fundamental identity. It provides conditions for expressing that identity more fully. Similarly, difficult periods in your life don't threaten your psychological sovereignty. They reveal it. Pressure doesn't compromise your authenticity. It demonstrates it. Manipulation attempts don't weaken your independence. They strengthen it by providing opportunities to practice conscious resistance. The tree's strength isn't visible from the surface. You can't see the vast network of roots that anchors it, the deep tap roots that reach water sources far below, the lateral roots that spread in all directions to create stability. You only see the trunk, the branches, the leaves. But the real power of the tree lies in what's hidden beneath the surface. Your psychological sovereignty works the same way. The visible parts, your behavior, your responses, your choices, are supported by invisible inner work that others can't see. Your ability to remain unmoved by manipulation is rooted in self-knowledge they don't witness. Your capacity to think independently is nourished by values you've cultivated in private. Your strength to resist pressure grows from practices you've developed in silence. People might wonder how you stay so centered when they're feeling stressed and reactive. They might ask how you remain so clear when they're feeling confused and overwhelmed. They might be curious about how you make decisions so easily when they struggle with every choice. What they don't see is the root system you've been developing, the daily practices of conscious awareness, the consistent questioning of influence attempts, the patient work of distinguishing between authentic and artificial responses. They see the fruit, but not the years of cultivation that made it possible. Like the ancient tree, you become a source of stability not just for yourself but for your entire environment. Your psychological sovereignty creates a field of influence that affects everyone around you. Your refusal to be manipulated makes manipulation less effective in your social circles. Your commitment to authentic response encourages others to question their own reactive patterns. You become what the environment needs, a stable reference point in a world of constant change, a model of what's possible for human consciousness, a living demonstration that freedom is available to anyone willing to do the inner work necessary to claim it. But perhaps most importantly, you discover that psychological sovereignty is not a destination, but a way of being. Like the lighthouse, you don't achieve some final state of being unmanipulable. You become someone who responds to manipulation attempts from such a centered place that they simply don't affect you. Like the completed sculpture, you don't finish the work of becoming authentic. You embody authenticity as a living expression of ongoing conscious choice. Like the ancient tree, you don't arrive at some perfect state of rootedness. You continue growing deeper and spreading wider with each passing season. This is what you're building. Not a perfect defense against manipulation, but a way of being so rooted in your own truth that external pressure cannot move you from your center. Not a complete understanding of every influence technique, but such deep self-knowledge that you can recognize what doesn't belong. Not immunity to all psychological pressure, but such strong connection to your authentic values that you choose your responses from wisdom rather than reaction. You are becoming unshakable, not because nothing can touch you, but because nothing can move you from who you truly are. This is your identity now, the lighthouse that guides others through psychological storms, the sculpture emerging from the marble of your conditioning, the tree whose roots go so deep that no surface disturbance can topple it. You are becoming what the world needs most, a free human being who cannot be controlled, influenced, or manipulated because they have remembered who they actually are beneath all the artificial layers that others have tried to impose. Stand in this identity. Grow from this foundation. Shine from this truth. You are unshakable because you have chosen to be. In a world that profits from your noise, your silence becomes a revolutionary act. In a culture that feeds on your reactivity, your stillness becomes a form of resistance. In a system designed to keep you constantly responding, your ability to pause becomes your greatest weapon. You have learned to recognize manipulation. You have developed practices to resist influence. You have built metaphorical frameworks to understand your psychological sovereignty. Now comes the final mastery, the cultivation of strategic silence and the practice of conscious detachment from outcomes. This is where you transcend being merely resistant to manipulation and become someone who operates from a fundamentally different paradigm, one where external pressure cannot even register as a threat because you have become so centered in your own truth that disturbance is impossible. The power of strategic silence. Most people fear silence. They fill every gap in conversation, every moment of stillness, every pause in activity with noise, words, or distraction. This fear of silence makes them predictable, controllable, and manipulable. They will say anything to avoid uncomfortable quiet. They will agree to anything to restore conversational flow. They will react to anything rather than sit with uncertainty. Your silence becomes your strength. When someone makes an unreasonable request, don't rush to explain why you can't fulfill it. Sit with the silence. Let them feel the weight of their own unreasonableness. Often, they will withdraw the request or modify it to something more acceptable simply because they cannot bear the quiet tension of having asked for something inappropriate. When someone tries to provoke an emotional reaction from you with inflammatory statements, don't immediately defend or counterattack. allows silence to expand around their words. In that silence, their manipulation attempt loses its power because it has nothing to push against. Most provocations are designed to create reactive engagement. Silence refuses to provide the expected fuel for conflict. When someone offers you an opportunity that requires immediate decision, resist the pressure to respond instantly. Say, "I need to think about this," and then actually think. Use silence to create space between their pressure and your decision. Most manipulation succeeds through time pressure and the illusion of urgency. Your willingness to be silent in the face of urgent requests reveals how often these urgencies are artificial. Practice silence as a form of power rather than passivity. The person who can be comfortable with silence in social situations holds tremendous influence, because others will often fill that silence with revelations, admissions, or concessions they never intended to make. The person who doesn't need to have the last word in every conversation maintains dignity and mystery. The person who can sit quietly while others become agitated or reactive demonstrates a level of self-control that commands respect. But silence isn't just external, it's internal. Learn to create silence within your own mind. Most manipulation succeeds because your internal dialogue is so busy that you don't notice external attempts to direct your thinking. When your mind is chattering constantly with worry, planning, rehearsing, and analyzing, you have no mental space to recognize influence attempts or choose conscious responses. Develop the ability to quiet your internal commentary at will. This doesn't mean stopping all thought. It means creating enough mental stillness that you can observe your thoughts rather than being carried away by them. When your mind is calm and spacious, manipulation attempts become obvious because they create disturbance in your natural state of peaceful awareness. Meditation is the most direct path to this internal silence, but it doesn't require formal sitting practice. You can create moments of internal quiet anywhere, while walking, while waiting, while doing routine tasks. The goal is to become comfortable with the spaciousness of your own consciousness rather than constantly filling it with mental activity. The art of detachment. The final barrier between you and complete psychological sovereignty is your attachment to outcomes. As long as you need specific results from your interactions, you remain vulnerable to anyone who can threaten or promise those results. Detachment isn't indifference, it's freedom from the desperate need for things to be different than they are. When you're attached to being liked, you can be manipulated by anyone who threatens to withdraw their approval. When you're attached to being right, you can be controlled by anyone who triggers your need to prove your position. When you're attached to getting your way, you can be influenced by anyone who offers to help you achieve your desired outcome. Detachment means engaging fully with life while holding your preferences lightly. You can want things without needing them. You can prefer certain outcomes without being devastated if they don't occur. You can work toward goals without having your self-worth depend on achieving them. Practice wanting what you have rather than having what you want. This doesn't mean becoming passive or unambitious. It means finding satisfaction in your current reality while still working to improve it. When you're content with what is, you cannot be manipulated through promises of what could be. When you're at peace with your present circumstances, you cannot be controlled through threats of what might happen. Develop the ability to hold your opinions as working hypotheses rather than as aspects of your identity. When your sense of self isn't threatened by being wrong, you cannot be manipulated through arguments designed to make you defend positions you haven't fully examined. When you're genuinely curious about truth rather than committed to being right, you become immune to manipulation techniques that exploit ego and pride. Practice experiencing disappointment, rejection, and failure as information rather than as judgments on your worth. When these experiences don't threaten your fundamental sense of self, you cannot be controlled by anyone who threatens to create them. When you're not afraid of losing, you cannot be manipulated by anyone who offers to help you win. The daily disciplines of freedom. Your psychological sovereignty must be maintained through daily practice. Freedom isn't an achievement you attain once. It's a choice you make repeatedly through specific disciplines that keep your consciousness clear and your will aligned with your authentic values. Gratitude practice. Begin each day by consciously acknowledging 3 things you're genuinely grateful for. This isn't positive thinking or forced optimism. It's training your attention to notice what's already working in your life rather than focusing only on what's missing or wrong. Gratitude makes you less vulnerable to manipulation through manufactured dissatisfaction. When you're aware of how much you already have, you're less susceptible to marketing that exploits feelings of inadequacy or lack. Gratitude also shifts your baseline emotional state from wanting to appreciating. Most manipulation techniques rely on creating desire for something you don't have or fear of losing something you do have. Genuine gratitude immunizes you against both by grounding you in present moment awareness of what actually exists in your life right now. Mindfulness meditation. Spend at least 10 minutes each day in conscious awareness of your present moment experience without trying to change it. This builds your capacity to observe your thoughts and emotions without being controlled by them. Most manipulation succeeds by triggering automatic emotional reactions that bypass conscious awareness. Meditation strengthens your ability to notice these reactions before they carry you away. Even brief periods of mindful awareness create space between stimulus and response, the space where your freedom lives. In that space, you can choose how to respond rather than simply reacting based on conditioning. The more you practice conscious awareness in the safe environment of meditation, the more naturally it arises in challenging real-world situations. Self-control exercises. Deliberately practice saying no to yourself in small, safe ways. Skip dessert when you want it. Take cold showers when you prefer warm ones. Walk instead of drive when driving would be easier. Exercise when you'd rather watch television. These micro-disciplines build your psychological muscle memory for choosing conscious responses over automatic reactions. Self-control isn't about deprivation. It's about developing the capacity to choose your actions based on your values rather than your immediate impulses. Every time you override an impulse with a conscious choice, you strengthen your ability to resist manipulation that targets your desires and weaknesses. Evening review. Before sleep, spend 5 minutes reviewing your day from the perspective of consciousness versus unconsciousness. Where did you respond consciously versus react automatically? Where did you notice manipulation attempts versus missing them entirely? Where did you choose from your values versus being influenced by external pressure? This review isn't about judging yourself, but about learning from your experience. Each day provides dozens of opportunities to practice psychological sovereignty. The evening review helps you extract maximum learning from these opportunities so you become more skilled with each passing day. The integration. These practices work together to create a comprehensive lifestyle of psychological sovereignty. Silence creates space for conscious choice. Detachment eliminates the vulnerabilities that manipulation exploits. Daily disciplines maintain your capacity for awareness and self-control. As you integrate these elements, you'll notice something remarkable happening. Manipulation attempts become not only ineffective, but obvious. You'll start seeing the techniques, recognizing the patterns, predicting the outcomes before the manipulator even completes their approach. What once was invisible influence becomes transparent strategy. You'll also notice that your relationships begin to change. People who were accustomed to influencing your behavior through guilt, pressure, or emotional manipulation will find that their techniques no longer work. Some will respect your newfound sovereignty and develop more authentic ways of relating to you. Others will become frustrated with their inability to control you and may withdraw from your life. This is not a loss, it's a clarification. You're discovering who relates to you authentically versus who was only interested in what they could get from you. You're learning which relationships were based on genuine connection versus which were based on your willingness to be influenced and controlled. The broader impact. Your psychological sovereignty extends beyond personal benefits. Every person who becomes immune to manipulation makes manipulation less effective for everyone. Your refusal to be controlled contributes to a cultural shift away from influence-based interactions toward more authentic forms of human connection. Your example gives others permission to develop their own psychological sovereignty. Your demonstration that freedom is possible inspires others to examine their own conditioning and choose their own responses. Your embodiment of authentic choice in a world of manufactured consent becomes a beacon for those who are ready to reclaim their own minds. You become part of a silent revolution, a growing network of individuals who cannot be manipulated because they have remembered who they are beneath all the artificial layers that others have tried to impose. This revolution doesn't require organization, leaders, or manifestos. It only requires individuals choosing consciousness over unconsciousness, authenticity over conditioning, sovereignty over submission. The choice before you. Everything you've learned in this journey comes down to a single choice that you must make not once, but continuously. Will you live consciously or unconsciously? Will you choose your responses or let them be chosen for you? Will you think your own thoughts or think the thoughts that others profit from you thinking? This choice presents itself in every interaction, every decision, every moment when pressure is applied to your consciousness. You can pause or react. You can question or accept. You can choose from your values or be influenced by external pressure. You can respond from silence or be triggered into noise. The forces that seek to manipulate your consciousness are sophisticated, well-funded, and constantly evolving. But they have one fundamental weakness. They require your unconsciousness to succeed. They need you to remain unaware, reactive, and controllable. They depend on your willingness to let them think for you, feel for you, and choose for you. Your consciousness is their kryptonite. Your awareness is their weakness. Your authentic choice is their defeat. You now possess the understanding to recognize manipulation. You have the practices to resist influence. You have the metaphors to maintain your identity as a psychologically sovereign individual. You have the disciplines to sustain your freedom on a daily basis. You have everything you need to become a person who cannot be manipulated because you are too awake, too aware, too rooted in your own truth to be moved by external pressure. The only question remaining is whether you will use what you now know. The time for learning is over. The time for application has begun. Every moment from now on is an opportunity to practice psychological sovereignty or to fall back into unconscious reactivity. Every interaction is a chance to respond from your authentic center or to be triggered into automatic behavior. Every choice is a decision to live as a free human being or as a sophisticated puppet. When you master the art of strategic silence, practice conscious detachment from outcomes, and maintain the daily disciplines of awareness and self-control, you become something that the manipulators fear most, a human being who thinks their own thoughts, feels their own feelings, and makes their own choices regardless of what anyone else wants from them. When you embody psychological sovereignty completely, you discover that freedom isn't just personal. It's transformational for everyone whose life you touch. Your consciousness becomes contagious. Your authenticity gives others permission to be authentic. Your sovereignty inspires others to reclaim their own. You become what the world needs most, proof that true freedom is possible, that authentic choice exists, that human consciousness cannot be permanently controlled by anyone who understands its true nature. When you dominate the art of being unmanipulable, nothing and no one can shake you from your center. You become the lighthouse, the emerged sculpture, the unshakable tree. You become the person you were always meant to be before the world tried to make you into someone else. Stand in this truth. Live from this center. Choose from this freedom. The revolution begins with you.